All right, what's up, Dragon Brood? So this is going to be a little bit of a different type of stream or video than we've done in the past because we're spending time talking about uh, mana bases, right? We're doing something we haven't really done before. This is going to be a bit different, and this is going to be like it's not really like I know some of you come here for the gameplay and whatever, but we're going to be covering how to make your mana better because I get a lot of questions from people saying they're struggling trying to make multicolor decks and they don't really understand how the mana goes together, or like when they build their decks they just never draw the right amount of mana or whatever it is, right? So this is going to be an opportunity to kind of dive deep a little bit on some of that, let everybody know kind of here's some tricks, here's some things I look for when I'm deck building, and maybe it helps you out. If not for these particular decks, hopefully there'll be takeaways you could apply to the next deck you build. At least that's what we're hoping for. So to that end, I have my phone over here making noise while I'm actually recording. That's terrible. Let's not do that. That's unprofessional. Okay, so let's hop over, take a look at Aaena here, and see what we can make happen. Oh no, my camera's not working on there. That's sad. We're gonna have to fix that because that's unacceptable. Let's go ahead and add the prepper camera. Hey, Andrew, I'm glad you find the topic useful because that's actually really important. Hey, there we go. There's an actual camera. All right, let's fix this real quick for y'all. Won't take but a second. I forgot I adjusted some things since I made this particular scene, and I got to make it better. So let's knock a couple things out, put things in the proper place, and then we'll be ready to go. Now, also, feel free to ask questions throughout this because I'll be probably talking about a few different things. So if you have a question, feel free to throw it out there. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. And it might even add to the conversation because other people might be thinking the same things you are and have similar questions. So feel free to go with that. All right. So let's take a look here and let's start by looking at just a monocolor deck. Let me see what I've got in here that I've played recently in single color. Let's take a look at this discard deck as an example. And we're going to go 1 color, 2 color, 3 color, just so there's a frame of reference here. Now, this was actually a discard deck, so we're going to ignore to some extent what the deck's doing because that's not that important for the lesson we're trying to go over forward today. Hey, Astro MTG, welcome. But when you're doing a single color deck, right now, we do have some lands that actually kind of let you get outside your box a little bit and give you more versatility in your lands, even though you're playing a single color. Because, like here, you see we've got 20 swamps. Let me turn the music down a little bit so it's not so distracting for y'all. There we go. When you've got something like this, you just max out your swamps, in this case, or islands or plains, whatever you're playing. But this deck also allows itself to do other things. Because we're going to be playing 24 to 25 mana in this type of deck anyway, then you don't need every single one to be a black producing source. So in this case, we decided to play 3 Mishra's Foundry. Because this is still a creature we can attack with, we can still block with it in a pinch. It still allows us to do other things other than have dead mana draws that we don't need, because it's just 1 color, right? We don't have to have every single one hit. But the key here is I couldn't play 4, whereas I would often play 4 in a deck where I'm playing 24, 25, 26 lands if they're all monocolor. The reason being is that if you go back and look at our spells, we have stuff that needs double and even quadruple black in this list that are key cards, right? We need to make sure we can cast Shieldred. We need to make sure we can cast Invoke Despair. So you don't want to get caught up behind, draws where you have 2 or 3 Mishra's Foundries in 1 swamp, right? That would be really bad. So you're trying to minimize the amount of that happening. But the odds are still pretty low. So you can get away with 3 of them in this type of list. But if I was playing, say, mono white control that plays just tons of white sources, then I would probably just play 4 Foundry and play like 25, 26 lands in that type of deck. Because though I'm playing a higher casting cost average, then I think I can still get away with those extra spots because I don't need that many things to be white. So it's really going to come down to your deck a lot of times how these decisions turn out. But in something like this, like a monocolor deck, you can take more of those chances and not feel as bad. Now, if we go back and look at let me grab a multicolor deck that we already saw this season. So let's say, we played Boros Artifacts, right? So let's crack this one open and take a look here. So in this case, we know we need 2 colors, right? And this is kind of where you have to start looking at some other numbers and say, all right, what percentage of the deck effectively is whatever color? So in this case, we have almost double the number of red sources as we have white sources. So this sort of tells us, okay, we need to be leaning more toward red mana to be able to do everything we need to do, right? This is before we even do our land counts, right? We know we're going to need that. Now, that said, we have a lot of colorless spells too. So we know we're going to be able to get away with a lot in this list. And that's actually totally fine, right? Just each deck's going to be different. I'm just using this as an example. So when we go in here and we start looking, we say, okay, now we know we have more red than white, almost 2 to 1. So we know more of our land needs to produce red than white. Easy enough so far. The problem, though, is we have things like this that we do sometimes want to play on turn 1. Or like this that we may want to play on turn 2, depending on the situations. So now it gets a little bit rough, right? Because we're trying to hit both red and white early and give ourselves options. So even though you have 2 to 1 red to white, you can't really just put 2 to 1 red to white mana sources, because some of those hands you draw are going to have those early white spells that you need to be able to cast as well. So your mana base, instead of being 60, or I guess 66-33 or whatever, ends up being closer to like 55-45 in some cases. Because the other thing too to look at in this list, and we did this purposely when we built it, is that everything only really requires 1 white or 1 red. So if you increase the odds of you getting both of those, then you should be able to play anything early. And the only thing we really have that needs extra mana is something like Rabbit Battery that wants to have a second red, right? So we kind of know what we're aiming for with the deck. So now you're saying we have 2 to 1 red to white, but we do need to play both of those colors early at times, depending on how the games progress. But everything only requires 1 white or 1 red, so we don't need a lot of each to be functional. Now, optimal, obviously you'll want extras so you can cast multiple spells or whatever. And then we're also playing an aggro deck, right? So we don't need a ton of mana to begin with. So those things all taken into consideration put us into the position that we kind of know what we're doing with the mana here. So if you look here, we've got 5, 6, plus 8 is 14. So you got 14 things that can make white. Though Sundown Pass does come into play tapped on turn 1. So while it does make both red and white, we do have to take in consideration we may not have use of it till turn 2. But that's fine. You can strategize your turns around that. Also, welcome, Flare. Good to see you. Red sources, we've got 7, 8, another 8, that's 16. So we've got 16 to 14. And that's not that unreal, considering 8 of them can produce either color. Now, what you don't often see in multicolor decks is we did go ahead and make that extra jump to playing Mistress Foundry in here. And again, this is because we're playing an aggro deck. You know, we're also playing artifacts, so it can play into like Machiko's Reign of Truth or whatever, potentially. So it does help us out to have this card in here. But we're talking a total of, what do we got here? 6, 7 is 13, and then another 9 is 22 plus 2 Foundries. So we're playing 24 total lands, when realistically, this is a land that can get away with probably 22 or 23 lands anyway. The only reason we're playing more really is because of Platoon Dispenser, because it's cost 5. If this wasn't in here and knowing we could cast Steel Seraph for 3, this deck could probably just get away with 22 lands as a whole. But since we're going to 24, then you might as well play the 2 Foundries and give yourself a chance at doing other things with that mana. Because again, this deck doesn't need a lot of mana. So if you draw those later, it still gives you something to do and that mana is not going to waste. So it really, as you can see, as we go through these decks, like it really is a dependency of what the deck is doing and how much mana you need. Let's take a look. Let me see if I have another multicolor deck, or a 2-color deck actually, that doesn't play. I built a lot of artifact decks this season. Okay, I don't know if this Dimir Zombies really takes care of us. Not really. It's not kind of doing what I want. Trying to find a better example for you here that we can talk about and say like, hey, here's why we want it. Let's actually, this is a different Boros aggro deck. Actually, man, I have a bunch of stuff here that we haven't really put on camera yet. So I'm not sure I want to roll those out before we get to the 3-color decks. But let's see. There's no Gruul aggro. Here we go. Here's a good example. We played this earlier in the season. Now, this is a case where we're going to have a lot of turns where we want to cast multiple spells. Right? So where the other decks were saying, okay, we don't need all that mana, or we have single color mana, we can play stuff like the Mishra's Foundry. This mana base is not going to be able to play Mishra's Foundry, because if you look, we're wanting to play red on turn 1, green on turn 2, possibly red and or green if we want to bushwhack something to kill it, right? This requires 2 colors on turn 2, right? We have so much stuff going on with this list that we can't really take a turn off. And, you know, we have stuff that needs double red. We have a thing that needs green and red, which we might want that and still be able to cast one of these other spells, right? So we need as much colored mana as possible. So this mana base can't get away with playing something like Mishra's Foundry because we just don't have the space, right? If we have even one of those colorless lands come up, it's possible we can't cast the spells we want to on time and do what we need to do. So that's a real issue. Right, so you just say, okay, that's not a consideration. So then we go back and start looking at our numbers. The average mana value of the deck is only 2.3. So again, we're not playing a lot of expensive stuff. Even if you look here at the 5 mana slot, we only have 2 things. At the 6 mana or 4 mana slot, we have 6 things. So we do need realistically probably 24, maybe even 25 lands, if those things on turn 4 or the 4 mana things are things we want to try to guarantee we hit on turn 4. Obviously, nothing's a guarantee, but you got to give yourself a best shot as you can. So that's something we'll be taking into consideration. And then we look at the different mana values. We have 6 gold color spells, which means we need green and red for those. And then we've got 23 things that have red in the cost, 14 that have green in the cost. So again, we're leaning more red here than green. But we also have taken consideration that 6 of those things also are things that need green and red. So that's going to put us in a little weird spot with the mana. But this is kind of one of the reasons it makes a good example for what we're doing. So we go over here and we look, we have 7, 8, and 8. We've got 15 red sources. And then I went ahead and split the difference and said, we're just going to have 15 green sources. And again, it looks a little weird. You could say, well, we just said we had way more red things than green things. That's kind of true, right? But again, we're considering the fact that some of these need both red and green. So we want to have that available as soon as we can. But additionally, our early turns, we are going to need to hit both colors because Bushwhack can go help us find the mana we need. We also have Ascendant Pack Leader. We've got Manabases Kakazan. And even on turn 2, being able to hit Hajar and Rada, like we need red mana and green mana. So we almost need every color all the time. Now, obviously, that's not a real thing. You can't have that perfectly, but we might as well just give ourselves even odds because we don't know what's going to come up. And there's even an argument to be made that if we hit the green mana, we can use Bushwhack, which lets us go search for a basic, to go get the red mana, right? So even though technically we have fewer spells that require green, having green pretty much guarantees we can hit everything. It's a weird scenario, but this is, again, depending on what the deck has available and what your cards are trying to do, this dictates a lot of what your mana needs to look like. So, yeah, this case, we just went even across the board. We have 7 each, Mountains and Forests. We have 1 each, Sekinja and Boseiju, which, by the way, Sekinja and Boseiju and Takenuma and Aganjo, whatever, like, these are basically free lands to play. The only downside is if somebody's playing something like, I don't know, Field of Ruin. But realistically, even then, you just go search one of your basics, right? There's almost no downside to playing these. They don't come into play tapped. And they just give you access to a spell, I'll put in quotes, later in the game for no real cost. Your opportunity cost on these is very, very low. The thing about it is you can't really play duplicates because they're legendary. You don't want to get caught with them early unless your deck is really heavy on legends. And then you're just taking the gamble that you can play them on the cheap and use their ability for almost no cost. And we've done that in a couple of lists where it makes sense. But here, just play one of each. And I would say pretty much whatever deck you're playing, unless you need the basics particularly. Because I do think there is some value still to playing one or two basics just so you can go fetch them. Again, in situations like Field of Ruin or random cards that say your opponent can go search for a basic land or whatever, you at least want to have access to that. But if that's not that big of a concern, then yeah, go ahead and play these as your one-offs. Because, again, it's like giving you extra spells without having to make slots for extra spells. And it's still land, right? So love it. I've seen some people who don't play with these. I don't understand. Like, if you're going to make now I get it. If you don't have them in your collection because they are rares, like that's fine. But if you have access to them, you might as well play them. They're genuinely free value. I would even say in paper, you might as well get one or two of each and then just have access to them for whatever deck you build, because you're probably going to put them in those Manabases. I can't think of much reason. I'm seriously, genuinely thinking, like, why would I not play them? But I can't think of many. Blue Asian says, how would lands that come into play tapped factor in? We are getting to that here in just a second on the 3-color Manabases. However, I would say this, since you brought it up. We do have, like, some of these lands that come into play tapped, but you still play them anyway because they can be untapped on turn 3+. Or if you're playing a deck that doesn't care about hitting turn 1 that often, then you go ahead and play these and just know they're going to be untapped on turn 2, and then you have 2 mana and you're good. I would say, if you're playing an aggressive deck, outside of a situation where maybe you're playing one of the tap lands that gains life, and your deck is a life gain deck or triggers from gaining life or whatever, I probably wouldn't play them. If you have a land that always comes into play tapped, it needs to be doing something significantly more than just making mana. Now, again, if you're budget conscious or you just don't have them, like, you work with what you got. But I'm saying, if you have access to other cards, there's almost no reason to play a land that just comes into play tapped without real value to the rest of the deck. Like, they're just not. Like, there's a reason you don't see them in any major deck list that you'll see a pro play, any tournament list, anything you download. Like, you just don't see them for that reason. They're just not efficient. You're giving up efficiency for no upside. Like, at least if you have the 3-color lands from, what was it, New Capenna, those at least cycle late in the game. And they're giving you 3 colors, right? So you're giving up the option of having it untapped to have the late game option of just letting it replace itself, or giving you access to 3 colors, right? So there's a reason you're doing it. Even the case here on something like Rockfall Vale, right? It comes into play tapped on turn 1, or turn 2, technically. But then on, you draw it, it's just an untapped land ready to go, right? So you're only giving up a little bit of that value to make sure you hit every color in your deck consistently. That's worth it, right? But if this was one that comes, and we have tons of lands because we keep making a bunch of common lands that come into play tapped. If they come into play tapped and just make 2 colors, not worth it. Honestly, I'm not even a huge fan of the ones that come into play tapped and gain a life, unless it particularly makes sense for that deck. And sometimes it does. Not all that often, but sometimes it does. Outside of those corner cases, though, I just wouldn't even bother with them. But okay, we've looked at a couple of 2-color decks. Let's take a look at some 3-color decks. Let's see what we got here. This is a good example. Maybe this Mardu Angels list we played a couple weeks ago. Actually, just last week, I think. Okay, so this is going to be a bit more over the place, right? Because we've got white and black we'd like to have access early to, but more likely white because we want to be able to get Giada or Thalia down. But then we need black and red to be able to cast stuff like the Harvester. And then we have double white. And not only that, later in the game, we're going to want double white and a black and a red, right? So this has a lot of color requirements all the way down. Like the Paragon's double white, Shieldred's double black, AO's double, or Owl, as I was told, is double white. And then Liza is actually double white and a black, right? So all of these have heavy color requirements. So that means right off the rip, we can't play any colorless lands, right? Everything has to produce as much as we can, as many multicolor lands as we can play and still cast our cards on time. This is kind of what we want to be doing. Now, there are some 3-color decks where you don't want to max out stuff like Sundown Pass, right? Because we need to hit turn 2, turn 3, whatever, like 1, 2, 3 on time as often as we can. This list isn't so much like that. As much as we would like to have a turn 2 Thali or Jada, that's about it, right? Everything else we can kind of take our time with, right? Because we have things later in the game that just have more value that we just want to make sure we have the right mana for it. So this list we can get away with a little bit. But again, let's go back and take a look here. You do see the average casting cost of the deck is significantly higher than the last deck we looked at, right? The other one I think was 2.3. This one's a 3.3. So you're talking a whole mana more than the other one is. We don't have any turn 1 things. So that makes it to where we can get away with a few more of those tap lands. Because we don't have anything on turn 1 we're worried about playing ever, right? But we do have a lot of things if you're looking at the list. Now, the 6 is a little misleading because those, I believe, are the Steel Seraphs, which we're probably going to be playing for 3 more than 6. So realistically, we have stuff that costs 5, but we do actually have the Angel that, in a perfect world on turn 6, we get to kick it with red and with black to get those extra triggers off of it, right? So a lot of mana requirements. You can see here there's 19 things that need white mana, 11 things that need black mana, 6 things that need red mana. Then we have a couple of colorless things, which are just the Steel Seraphs. And then we have 4 gold cards. So lots of different things going on this list. But the other untold story here is, like we were pointing out, we know for sure there's stuff like Shieldred that needs double black. There's stuff like the Angels that need double white. There's the Owl that needs double white, right? So lots of requirements in here. So we're going to play 25 lands. This is the type of deck that it wouldn't be unreasonable to play a 26 land as well and cut something else. Because even though you look and say, oh, the average casting cost is only 3.3. Yeah, but a lot of those require more mana. Like our key cards require 4 mana. And then even then, like we said, there's the Angel that requires technically 6 mana, right? And getting the Dragon is 5 mana. And if maybe we do want to cast a big Steel Seraph at some point late in the game, that is 6 mana. So if we want to do that, you do have to think about late game considerations in this type of build. But looking at the lands, we still went, okay, we're going to play a full set of Sundown Passes, which come into play tapped. We're playing a full set of Sulphur Springs that come into play tapped. But then we're only playing 2 Haunted Ridge. And then we're playing a full set, or Sulphur Springs doesn't come into play tapped, sorry. Haunted Ridge does. And Shattered Sanctum. Right? So that gives us 10 lands that are going to come into play tapped on turn 1 or 2. So we kind of want to balance that out so we can try to play our turn 2 thing. So if you notice what we did here is the lands that made white are the ones that we maxed out. We played 4 Sundown Pass, 4 Shattered Sanctum. So hopefully we can play these on turn 1 and then find one of our other untapped lands on turn 2. The reason being is your key cards here on the early turns happen to be white. Right, so it wouldn't make sense for us to max out the Haunted Ridge and give ourselves all these lands that come into play tapped to where we may not be able to play anything on turn 2, because realistically, the things we need are white. So having the land that makes red and black doesn't make a lot of sense unless we were playing a more defensive deck and then wanted to make sure we were casting the Go for the Throats Infernal Grasp on turn 2. Does that make a little more sense? And this also gives us the ability that if we do that with Shattered Sanctum and with the Showdown Pass or Sundown Pass, now we have half of our requirement for the Blood Tithe Harvester. So there's going to be a lot of times now where we can play either of these on turn 2 and be ready to play this on turn 3. Or in the events we don't actually draw one of these, we're still halfway to casting a Harvester on 2. So we don't really get caught up in too many bad spots by playing those. However, if we played a max value of Haunted Ridge, there would be several times where we get red or black, and then say we draw a Plains or a Takenuma, or not even Plains, a Takenuma or Sekinzen, or even draw like a Sulphur Springs, where we would just not be able to cast the best cards in our deck for us early, right? So these are the type of considerations you have to make to when you're playing the deck. It's not just the colors, but it's also what is the deck trying to do, what's it trying to play when, what are the functions of the deck, and having your land aligned to do those things. Because I think it's very easy to just like, oh, well, I need to cast all these colors, I'm just going to play 4 of each of these lands. It's like, well, that's not really the best way to go, right? I get it, but it's not really the right way to be. Because you're just going to end up in situations where you just can't play the right card at the right time. Or again, You end up with too many lands that come into play tapped, and it's not really what you want. Matter of fact, I would say unless you're playing something slower, like a more controlling type deck, 10 is probably the most of these, I don't know what we're calling them, the slow lands that I would want to have in a deck. Now, I would go to 12 if I was playing, I don't know, some hardcore Esper control deck and I expected the games to go to turn 10, 12 all the time, and I'm playing depopulates and other sweepers, then like, yeah, you don't really care if you take some early damage. You're not trying to play any aggressive creatures. That's not your game plan. Then it's okay, because then you're saying, okay, I want to make sure I just have the right mana at every point after turn 3 or 4 that I can do everything I need to do, right? So then you don't really care. So you just go ahead and play them because it allows you to get into the situations you want, and you know you're playing for the long game anyway. But when you're playing these aggro and mid-range decks, it's really about, okay, what can I do on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3? And do these lands allow me to do the things within my game plan that I'm aiming for? And here, I think we solved that pretty well. So you end up in enough situations where you can hit the double white, because we have way more things that need double white than double black, right? That's the other reason to lean on more white sources from your lands. Even though there was a lot of things that needed different colors and whatever, like, you need to make sure you can cast all your double white stuff, right? So that's the other reason we're leaning on those. We don't care so much about the pain lands. The pain lands are fine. They do everything we want to do in this deck. You got to play the pain lands. Like, I know people like hate the idea of just like, I don't want to play lands that deal damage to me, whatever. Sometimes it's just the efficient thing to do. And again, in this deck, we do have ways to gain life as well. You have Shieldred, and you've got Archangel of Wrath, and you have 3 Inspiring Overseers. These are all things that, and I guess technically Liza as well later in the game. You have lots of things that you can gain life with. So you're not really worried about taking damage. But we've offset that with 10 of the slow lands that don't deal damage. So you should end up in enough situations where you can end up just tapping stuff like Sulphur Springs just for colorless mana. So after about turn 4, hopefully you won't be taking that much damage from these anyway. It's just, you assume your game plan is going to have you taking at least 2 damage or 3 damage on the first couple of turns. Then after that, you'll see what happens. But you can't really be afraid of them. They're too good not to play. You know, I get that people looking to say, I don't know, like taking damage and, mono red or whatever, like, fine. That's a cost of doing business. Because what you're giving up by not playing those, again, if we go back to talking about those lands that come into play tap that don't add a bunch of value, even if you're gaining a life, you're losing the value of playing the cards you would need to play on that turn. And when the reality is, a lot of times playing that card on that turn would actually slow down the damage you would be taking anyway from the opponent. Sometimes it just stonewalls them. They just quit attacking with one of their creatures. Sometimes they spend mana to get rid of that creature or something else. So you're taking less damage on a coming turn because they didn't add another body to the board. And you're getting a free turn where they're not going to interfere with whatever it is you're going to do, right? So you're giving up all kinds of value by playing those worst tap lands. So while you are taking a point, sometimes it's just the right strategy to take the point. The thing to remember is your life is a resource. As long as it's not 0, you're not dead. And if y'all watch any of my recent videos on the channel, we've had several where we got down. Hell, we had a game just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, where we got down to 1 life during an attack step, gained some life, went back to 4, and then started to turn the game around, right? So sometimes you just got to take that risk and chop down your life total little by little to put you in the position to be able to win. But you need to efficiently be able to cast all your spells to get into that position. Now, we have another deck that played Multicolor, and I think we just put this up today, which is the Bant Tokens list. And this one's a bit different even than the last one. Because again, you're looking here, we do have the ability to play Spar as headquarters, right? Which is one of the lands we talked about earlier from New Capenna that produces 3 colors and comes into play tapped. But we're not playing a full set of them. Again, because in this case, we do want mana open. Whether we need to try to remove something, or we want to counter something, or we just want to play Gallic Readers or join the dance, right? We have a lot of things. Look at all these things we could do on turn 2, right? So we don't want a ton of things that are tapped on turn 2, but we still need to be able to cast our stuff. So if you notice here, we're playing Overgrown Farmland, we're playing Deserted Beach, and that's it. We're not playing the 3rd slow land. Just not worth the value. But we went ahead and played 4 Attica Waste, 4 Yavimaya Coast, and then we're going in on the Spar's headquarters. But only 3, because again, we don't want too many things that come into play tapped. But this still effectively gives us 11 lands that come into play tapped on turn 2. So if we're not careful, we could get caught. So this could put us in situations where we may want to mulligan a lot, unless we think we're going to hit a solid turn 3 with something like a wedding announcement that's hard to remove and makes a body or whatever. Which, sometimes that's part of your game plan. You just got to, it's going to affect your mulligans. But overall, average casting cost of this deck is less than the last one, more than the Gruul deck we looked at, right? This is 2.6. We don't have anything really expensive. We have 1 5-mana thing, so really nothing, effectively. But if you look, we have a huge requirement for white and several multicolor things. We have 9, so we have to take that in consideration. But when you're talking 76% of that deck is white, we can lean on that if we want to. We have very little that's blue, other than, a couple of spells, and this includes some of the things that are in those multicolor things, because we're playing like Ascendancy that needs blue. And then, of course, some green stuff. So, almost everything requires white on some level. So, no matter what we did, we needed the maximum number of lands that produce white. So, that's part of the reason we're playing the 4 Deserted Beach, the 4 Overgrown Farmland, and the Attiker Waste, right? As many of our multi-lands as possible produce white, so we don't miss the key spots throughout this deck while we're playing. Spar's Headquarters produces all 3. Yavimaya Coast produces all 3. Now, an interesting thing you'll see here, and this was a decision I made late in deck building, was which spots did I want the basics to go to? And I put a lot of thought into this, and I originally thought, you know what, maybe I want this to be a forest instead of an island. And this is one of those cases, like, I kind of flipped a coin. So I don't have a good answer for you here as which, but I figured I have all of these things that make green. I have Boseiju. I wasn't going to play Otawara because I still wanted at least one land that made just that color that came into play untapped. But oddly, if it was Otawara, I could never search for it. Right? And I decided I was already playing Boseiju, so I didn't want to play Otawara and Boseiju, and then it would have been like a weird, let's make a call on which one's which. And I just figured in a world where there's more possible artifacts right now, I'd rather have Boseiju. And then I made my other basic an island. Like, so if you're probably wondering, like, why is there a random island, but there's less blue cards than anything else? That's literally why. I decided I wanted one of each land that came into play untapped that made just that color. But I didn't want them all to be non-basics. Like, the other one is really what that came down to. So there are some odd decisions that can probably still go either way that won't affect the outcome of the deck that much. But I figured I would mention that in case somebody saw this and went like, well, why was that the choice? That was really the logic. I want to be able to search for some of these if the situation comes up. And that was that. I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. And Boseiju, I think, was more versatile for this deck than Otawara. Though Otawara bouncing something to protect your own thing is actually pretty cool. I just figured Boseiju was it. Hey, look, the bots are in the chat. Gotta love that. Gotta hit a quick report button and we'll just get back to business. Because that's how it works. Gotta love that. But hey, it just means we're making it if the bots are showing up, right? Oh, by the way, if y'all have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. I don't have a problem with that. I'll answer any deck building questions, any questions about standard, whatever you want right now. Feel free to toss those in. Alex says, was going at 1.75x and just caught up. Oh, well, welcome. Now you're caught up. So yeah, so there's no perfect formula, I'll say, right? There are going to be times where you go, okay, I'm going to use this math and I'm going to use this heuristic or whatever to try to build the deck. But each individual deck does come with its own requirements. Like we're saying here, as though I normally wouldn't necessarily play all of this many tap lands or whatever in an aggro deck. But the way it works out, it's like, you know what? I think I can still get to turn 2 pretty regularly. And as long as I have white or green, yeah, I think this works out. And I still need to be able to cast double white, on some spots that are pretty critical. So I want to make sure I have as many white sources as possible. So like this kind of caused me to break my rules a little bit. This also has a couple of ways to draw cards in a creature deck, which I don't normally have. So there's a few different things going on here that made me change what I would carry as like a personal heuristic for a deck. And that's the tough part, which is why I wanted to do this type of video, because I think there's a lot of people that are just like, hey, just tell me this thing you do so I can do it every single time when I'm building a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 color deck. And it's just not that easy, unfortunately. I mean, there's a lot of different considerations based on the deck themselves. I just says, why does CGB call it Wooburg mana? I'll type it in the chat and I will show you. But it's basically white is W, blue is U, black is B, red is green. I mean, R is red and G is green. So when you phonetically pronounce it, it looks like Wooburg, W-O-B-R-G, W-U-B-R-G. But you know what I'm saying. So it's just a phonetic reading of the 5 colors of stuff. So if you're old school, a lot of people just call it Wooburg. Blue Asian says, I've been making sure to have a basic of each color I need nowadays with the Seiju and Field of Root and Ruin floating around. I don't think that's always necessary. Honestly, I think there's sometimes you just don't need them, and it's just not necessarily worth it. Like, depending on the type of deck you're playing. Like, if I'm playing, it's a good example, the Gruul deck, right? Where I have so many low-cost things or whatever, I would want to more efficiently be able to cast all my stuff and not get gunked up by, like, I don't know, a basic showing up and then not being able to cast 2 spells on turn 3 or something, right? Because I get the wrong basic or some such. It makes more sense to say, you know what? If they blow up my land and I'm short 1, then fine, I'm just short 1, right? Because you don't need anything more than 4 mana in that deck anyway. Same thing here. I kind of need 4, but I don't desperately need 4. As long as I get to 3 in almost any combination, I'm probably fine. So, whatever. Like, I only have a couple of basics and I'm good. Like, you just take that risk because I don't need more than that anyway. If somebody, and plus, if my opponent's taking a turn off to just blow something up instead of deal with something of mine, I'm probably good with that anyway, right? Because I'm playing the aggro deck, right? So if you're taking a turn off to not counter one of my things or not kill one of my things, and your option is, I got to blow up one of your lands, great. You know, so in this case, I'll possibly just draw one of these, hopefully the plains if I haven't drawn it just the hard way, and then just put that into play. But like I was saying earlier, I don't have a forest. But I'm also playing enough multi-lands that I should be able to hit a forest fairly easily. And I only never need 1. That's the other thing. I need multiple white sources, but if I get 1 green or 1 blue, we're golden. So there's no need to even worry about having those extra basics, because I'm rarely going to have turns. I think maybe, even in the video for the sec, I maybe had 1 turn where I wanted to cast like Gallic Readers and Join the Dance or something. But even that's not that common in this deck. So if you get 1 green or 1 blue to go with any of your white mana, you're normally solid. So maybe I'd want to search for a white, which again, I have a plains in there I could go search for or whatever, just to make sure I have double white. But anything else, not really that necessary. You had them take out your only source of a color, Mia unable to get back a few times. Yeah, that's fine. If it happens, it happens. Like, here's the thing. And if you look at the decks right now, very few people are playing Field of Ruin. A lot of times, Field of Ruin's been replaced by people playing Foundry, right? So that's another thing of just understanding the metagame. Like, if somebody just comes up and you got a Field of Ruin and I happen to only have 1 green mana and you get rid of it and I can't search for it and I just don't draw 1 for 3 more turns, so be it. I just get caught by a corner case. I think one of the flaws people make when they're deck building is they try to solve for every single problem that can come up. But the reality is, you would only face any of those problems when you're talking about corner cases. I mean, less than 5% of the time, probably, right? So why deck build for a thing that almost never comes up? Because you're going to have more situations potentially where that thing you're solving for causes a problem than it helps solve the problem you're trying to solve for, if that makes sense. So still build for your most efficient scenarios, but know what you're worried about or playing around. Because it's not worth hamstringing yourself just to solve for a thing that's just not going to happen. I mean, you know, people lose one time to like a Reanimator deck, and then they're like, oh, now I got to play these 3 or 4 cards to get things out of the graveyard. It's like, well, okay. But the reality is, we saw Reanimator decks pretty hot for like the first, 5 days of the set release? And now I run into maybe 1 every 5 days. So if I'd have made those changes, I'd have so many cards that are way worse than other cards that could go in those decks, right? So not overreacting and understanding what the metagame is. Like, I think I've seriously seen 1 Reanimator deck in the last 5 videos I've made. Genuinely, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't even know if it's in the last 5. It might be in the last 6. So it's just one of those things you just don't need to do. You know, I see a lot of people do that. That you just try to solve for every single thing, and it's just going to put you in a worse situation. You got to be trying to do, because here's the problem. Ultimately, if you're trying to solve for all those things, you're making your deck worse at what it does. Right? You just have to know what situations are, what the problems are, and if they become prevalent enough in the metagame, then go ahead and start making hard changes to solve for those, because you're going to run into them a lot. The other thing about the ladder, especially if you're playing best of one, is kind of who cares, right? Because if you do run into a thing, all right, that game's done in what, like 3 minutes? Cool, I'm done. I'll just move on to the next game, and I'll just get my win back and just keep on, right? You're not doing that much harm to yourself to be concerned about it. And if it's a best of 3 thing, then there's even less concern to build about it, because you get a sideboard. You're going to play games 2 and 3. So when you really logic it out, there's not a lot of reasons to try to overcorrect for a corner case situation. That's why I don't do it. Yoshio says, "Oh, live. I didn't know you did this. I do live on here and on Twitch. So links are always in my descriptions. If you look, I do have links to those." All right. So that's another 3-color deck. Like I said, that just has different requirements than the last one. Because, again, as much as I'd like to say, always do this, like, as you can see, I've like said something like, okay, I try not to have more than like 9 up to 10 maybe of the lands that come to play tapped or blah, 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 right? But then here, I literally just broke that right after I told you, because of the deck's different and just has different requirements that I want to hit on certain turns. And it just makes sense for me to do it, right? And I think that's kind of the tough part, is anything, and that's one of the things that makes Magic good, you know, but also problematic, because as much as people want, like, hey, I need this tutorial for building this, I want to know what numbers of mana I should play or whatever, I'm always hesitant to tell people outright, because there's literally, it feels like every deck you build is going to be an exception to the rule, right? I might say, well, you know, aggro decks, honestly, you probably only need like 22, 23 land. You're going to be gold, right? That's great. And then I immediately build this one that, I don't know, what has 24 or 25 land in it. How many land are we playing in this one? We're playing 23 in this one. All right. So it just depends, right? Like, every deck's going to look different depending on the requirements. And that's the tough part, because like it's easy to say you generally want this, but then immediately it's kind of like anything we say about the English language, right? I before E, except after C. And then there's words like neighbor or way that, you know, whatever, right? So like you immediately start going, well, this is the thing you normally want to do, but there's this case, and then there's this case, and there's this case. Like, that's going to happen a lot. That's why when I talk about this stuff, I try to show, like, these are the reasons. So you can take that knowledge away to the next deck and say, like, oh, I remember when PowrDragn was building this type of deck and we were talking about Manabases. This is similar to that, so maybe I want to follow that, you know. Or, oh, he did mention if you have this, then you don't have to worry about that. Maybe I can go ahead and play an extra colorless land that does something, right? Whereas this deck can't afford to play a colorless land, because we do need blue and green and white. And there are going to be turns you want to cast multiple things, or activate something, or cast something and leave mana up for make disappear. So, like, this is one of those aggro decks. There's just no room for colorless lands of any kind. Like, we'd just be hamstringing ourselves on random turns. But we showed some others today that it made a lot of sense to go ahead and play the colorless lands, because we didn't need much, or we only need one of each color or whatever, and then everything else is gravy. But that's not the case here. Mandu says, do you think more Triome lands are coming to Standard soon? I can't make that prediction. Like, anything in the future, I'm not in R&D. I have no opinion on that. Would it be cool if they did? Maybe. Would it change much? I don't know, to be honest. I mean, just some decks that don't have them would play 2 or 3 of them, but I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure the value of that question, to be honest. Even if I said yes, I don't know what that changes. Like, and not to be rude, I don't know if I say yes or no to that question what that even does. But I have no inside information on that. All right, let me see if I can find one more deck to talk about that's a little bit different, because I'm trying to give y'all different perspectives on why. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and look at this 5-color deck. No, we do not have all the triomes. We have 5. We have the 5 from New Capenna, and that's it. That are the opposite wedges, which like color into enemies or whatever, I think. Oh no, they're all friendly colors, actually. Yeah, because we have a blue, green, white one. Yeah, so yeah, those are the only ones. In historic, yes, but I'm talking about standard. We got the new 5 later, obviously. All right, so this is a good example, right? Where we're talking about 5-color mana bases now. Which a lot of this is going to apply to 4 colors as well. I just don't think I have a 4-color deck available at the moment. Actually, that's not totally true. We'll come back and look at something else if we have time. But obviously here, we're playing all 5 colors for a whole variety of reasons, and we need to have all the different colors at different points. Even taking a look here, we have more things that have white by a long shot. That makes up 60% of the deck. But then a bunch of stuff that's multicolor. So we're going to need a lot of colors at all times. Though a bunch of those do require white and something. And then just all kinds of other things. Like green being the second most at 53%. And then everything else kind of roughly the same percentage. Right? So we know our mana base. We need a bunch of white and a bunch of green. And then a little bit of everything else. Which puts us in this really ugly spot. So that's why when you get deck lists like this. So these allow us to cheat a little bit, because you can get lands that come into play untapped, because we're playing so many legends. So this gives you mana of any color for legends. And then this we can choose human most of the time, because that's a human, that's not, that is, right? So the majority of our creatures, except for a handful, are human. So these two let us cheat on our mana quite a bit. And sometimes you have to find stuff like that. Let's see. Alexander says, I have a 5-color Joda auto scoop deck, and I love it, but play Joda and they always scoop. I've actually not had that situation. I mean, I've had people play out games quite a bit whenever I play Joda. And I've also played out games, when opponents have cast Joda. So, I don't know. It's one of those things. But it really depends on who you run into, right? Everybody's going to have different experiences with different opponents. Also, thank you for that subscription, by the way. What we've got here, though, is this looks a little weird, because you see so many 1s and 2s of different lands. Like we talked about earlier, we have 2 Iganjos, when normally that's something you want to stay away from. But here, again, because we have so many legends, a lot of times we're casting this or activating it, I guess you'd call it, for just 1 white mana. So here, again, we get to cheat a little bit with 4 Plaza and 3 Secluded Courtyards. But we do want to make sure we just have all of our colors. And we do want to be able to hit green, because one of the reasons we're playing the deck is stuff like Fauna Shaman, and to an extent Gwenna, that we actually can't use one of these lands for, because we can't call... If we call humans, we can't cast those. These others, we can use this for Gwenna, we can't use it for Fauna Shaman. So this land produces green, also gets us white-blue. This land produces green, also gets us red-white. And then we have 1 Rafine's Tower. It makes white. That's fine. Just give us other options for other colors. But then here it's like, this makes green-white, this is green-white, this is red-white, this is green-red, this is white-blue. So like really all but 1, even this makes white, honestly. So yeah, all of our multi-lands produce white or green. And we saw those are the 2 most prominent colors in the deck. And then we're using these to skate around the issue of having tap lands. And then we are playing Sekinzan, Boseiju. I mean, not Boseiju. Sekinzan, Takenuma, Iganjo. And really just using these for the abilities they bring to the table. Now, I did forgo playing the 1 Boseiju, even though it would be green and would make sense. But that's because I actually wanted the ability of Takenuma more often to try to get Joda back out of the yard if Joda died or whatever. Didn't feel like the Boseiju was bringing enough to the table for the type of deck that we're playing, so I opted not to play that one. And I do have the ability, technically, with Fauna Shaman to get Lauren of the Third Path more frequently if we do need to destroy an artifact or enchantment anyway, and we don't give up the value of giving them another land. So deck considerations really played in a lot to this mana, but, we ended up here playing 24 lands, and that's only because we have Fauna Shaman that can help us search for something, we have Catilda that can let us tap for more mana, we have Gwenna that can tap for more mana. So if we didn't have the mana creatures, this would very easily for me be a 25 or 26 mana deck. And we'd probably find a way to go like another brush land and another overgrown farmland and just have more white-green lands if I were to do that. So if you played a version of this and maybe you didn't have Catilda and you didn't have Gwenna, I would just make room for, like I said, those two multicolor green-white lands and still be able to cast most of your stuff on time. I think that'd be a better use of that. Blation says, I would have expected another brush land over undergrown farmland on this list. To an extent, my issue here, though, is I felt like there were situations where we could get behind a little bit. And this was a case where I didn't want to take too much damage from my lands because we don't have that much life gain in this list, right? We do have Dennick and we do have Wandering Emperor Shieldred, but we have one Shieldred and we have two Wandering Emperor, which only a little bit of life gain. That's not much, right? And then we have two Dennicks, which we can search for Dennick and we can search for Shieldred. But again, that could be mana considerations that can make it hard to cast those potentially. So wanted to just lay off just a little bit. And we still have enough lands that come into play untapped because we've got the 4 Plaza, the 3 Secluded Courtyard, 1 Brushland, 2 Carplusion Forest, an Attica Waste, and then these other, what is that, another 6? So yeah, we've got plenty of lands that come into play untapped. And even for tap lands, you're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. Yeah, so we don't have a lot that really come into play tap. So we're not getting punished by playing the overgrown farmlands. Like, it's totally reasonable. Now, I would say if we were playing a lot more of the tri-lands that were guaranteed to come into play taps, then I probably would go without the farmland and I just gamble on the extra brush land, just to make sure we could play more of the things we need to on turn 2 and turn 3. But since that's not the case, I think we're all right just playing it. And this is a case where we don't have to take that risk to the life total as badly because it's just not necessary. And it is possible that because of Thalia, because of Fauna Shaman, even if we played it on turn 2, there are some reasonable time. A lot of times, actually, we played this where we didn't even take damage on 2 because we had a different multicolor land on 1 that allowed us to cast those with no issue. So I get it, though. I don't think that's totally wrong if you wanted to just play another brush land or whatever. I think it would be totally reasonable. But that was my logic on building this mana base the way I did. But yeah, again, 5 color lists, you're trying to take considerations in for the deck. Because again, because we have all the humans and we have all the legendary creatures, we can play courtyards and plazas and get away with stuff that we couldn't in necessarily other 5 color lists. So again, this comes down to what we were saying earlier, that as much as it's nice to have a heuristic and like, hey, if your casting cost is this high, play this many lands, or if you have this many of this color, play this thing. But then immediately we look at a different deck like this, that's 5 colors, and we go like, oh, well, because we can play these other lands, all those other rules don't matter, right? So it can be really tough. So hopefully this is the type of thing that helps y'all out, right? That this is the thing that, and maybe use this video as a reference in the future. If you're not sure and you're looking at building 2 or 3 colored decks, and you're like, I don't remember when I should be okay playing colorless lands, or whenever this should be a thing, feel free to check this video out. We tried to cover enough different deck types, so it made sense for everybody. The other thing, too, is I would also say, hop into the Discord if you ever have help. Do I think Shuffler's rigged? No, stop that nonsense. Shuffler's not rigged. Like, I know somebody's going to comment, but, like, it's not rigged. Here's the thing. If it was rigged, by now, all the best players would have figured out how to manipulate it, right? That's the first thing. Number 2, if it was rigged, why do you see the same players that do well all the time still doing well? If it was rigged, why would Wizards ever have somebody get mana screwed on their best competitive tournaments of the year where there's a lot of eyeballs on it? Like, we've seen that happen to people, right? It wouldn't make sense. If you can manipulate it, why would you not correct it on the biggest stage? Right? There's a bunch of anti-arguments. Like, if people say, oh, well, I had 4 games in a row where I got stuck at 3 land. Like, you know what? I've played games in paper where literally I drew 14 lands in a row. I've had the opposite where I've had 12 draws in a row where I didn't draw land. You know, so the reality is this, and this used to come up when anybody who's played online poker back in the day used to see this, right? One of the reasons the top poker players would want to multi-table and you could play 10 tables at one time is that your EV that you are playing based on, which basically the percentage of times a play is going to work in your favor, is maximized when you're playing more tables, right? Because you're going to see more of those situations, so you're going to balance out your averages more often, right? So if you're playing correct ABC poker, then it's going to work in your percentages more often. But it also means you're going to see a lot of those hands that are also bad beats, right? Because those are going to come up too. But you're going to see a lot more because you're playing 10 tables at a time. Kind of the same thing in Arena, right? If we go out and play a paper tournament, you're only going to play, let's say, 4 rounds and you play a top 8 or whatever. So maybe you're playing 6 or 7 matches, right? All those games go to 3. You're playing, what is that? 18 to 21 games total. That's over usually going to be about 5 or 6 hours, maybe even 7 hours. On Arena, if I play 7 hours, realistically, there's a good chance I'm going to play as many as 4 times that many games. Right? Think about that. Like one sitting, I'm going to see minimum 3 times. If I'm playing like mono red or something, maybe up to 5 times, as many games as I would see in one sitting of a tournament. So if I see something negative, it's going to look way worse because it popped up more often, whereas it may have only popped up once over those 20 times whenever I'm sitting down playing paper. The other issue is, as humans, we are programmed to remember the negatives more just in life, so we prevent ourselves from having the negative thing happen again, right? So the negative things stand out more often. The same way that the people that say it's rigged, we don't remember or talk about all those times where we just drew hot as the sun, or we got to 4 lands, never drew another land, and just drew spells we needed. Boom, 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 right? We don't ever talk about those or think about those. That's just not the way it is. Sometimes that just happens, Silky. Like you're saying, oh, how do I only get planes for my first 10 cards? Sometimes that happens. That can happen in paper. I have seen these things happen. But I've also played Magic for damn near the life of the game. So I've seen pretty much every ridiculous iteration of something that can happen to a person in a high level tournament or a cash tournament or a qualifier, right? Like I've been on the receiving end of both good and bad of those, right? So like, it's just a thing. Your decks always help me out. I use them to get perfect bones for a deck. That's exactly it. I don't think any deck list I put up should be something that people say, this is the thing I absolutely have to play, and it has to be played this way. Because I do make a lot of decisions that are for how I play or cards I like to use. I just responded to somebody the other day saying like, oh, your deck should be this, this, and this. I'm like, no, the deck shouldn't be this, this, and this. It's exactly what I want it to be. I wanted to play certain cards, and I built it a certain way with those considerations so I can play these cards. If you don't like those cards, then great, cut them. Play something else. You should. You should play absolutely what makes you feel good and what you enjoy playing. Mine are just bones, showcasing a concept or an idea. You might hate the idea entirely and think the deck's stupid. Or you like it, but you hate like 4 of my card choices. That's totally okay. Build what you want to build and have fun with it. The problem the shuffler has is it's coded wrong. The deck should be split into 4. It's not. It's fine. It's totally fine. Like they're using a similar thing that pretty much the majority of all card games I've ever seen uses some variation of. And it's accepted. Here's the thing. If you play Runeterra, you'll see people that complain about their thing. If you play Hearthstone, you see people complain about their thing, right? No matter what you're playing, somebody's complaining about it. They can't all be rigged. There's no benefit to them all being rigged, to be honest. They're just really not, right? Like, there's really not. I thought the deck type matchups were suspect. So no. Now, here's the thing that I think people don't understand when they've read stuff before that's not correct. Whenever you play the play queue, there is we'll call it an imaginary number of competitiveness or something, whatever strength value we'll say, assigned to different cards that are in decks. And I'm assuming the programmers probably do it based on the quality of those cards showing up in different competitive decks or tournament decks or whatever. And, rarity and whatever, and the life of people's collection or account. So, because the idea is it's trying to pair you with people that have relatively the same strength decks and or skill level and or length of time account, blah, 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 right? So if you're playing in the play queue, there is a higher percentage chance that you're going to run into certain other cards or decks. Because if you're playing a bunch of bad cards and bad decks, whether that's all you have in your collection or you're testing stuff or whatever, you're going to run into some of the same because their decks are going to rate out the same in that system. When you're on the ladder, that's not a thing. It's literally just whoever happens to be on and what level you're at or what rank you're at. That's it. And we've seen it even in my videos. I had a video, 3 days ago. I think that was like of the 9 matches, I think like 5 of them were against mono black. And then I had another video where didn't play a single mono black deck. It just happens. Right? And honestly, I played that deck some more off camera because I was having fun with the deck. Didn't play mono black for the next hour. Right? So it's not because of the deck. It's just when you're playing ranked, it's just whoever's available closest to your rank when it's trying to pair people up. There's like some MMR it tries to figure for whatever, who's won or lost most recently, and it tries to pair those people or whatever. But even then, that's a strength of schedule kind of thing that still has nothing to do with your deck, right? So the deck you're playing is not taken into consideration on the ladder. If you're playing the play queue, it absolutely is. I have a question about an interaction with Sun Gold Sentinel. Feel free to ask. Jeff Decker says the issue is that if you draw one land hand, for instance, if you keep the hand 90% of the time, your next 4 or 5 cards will not be land. It's a pattern, and you can look at your hand. I don't know if that's particularly true, but I just wouldn't keep a one land hand anyway. Like not even joking. I wrote an article for Pojo. God, was this 20 years ago now? Maybe. And literally the title I think was "Don't Keep One Land Hands." Like, and this is in a world where I think we were still able to play Land of War Elves and other stuff. Really, like, just keeping one land hands is just bad. Because at any point you don't draw a land, you're now behind. Right? Let's say you did get a land on your second draw. And then you don't get a land on 3, you don't get a land on 4, you get one on turn 5. Like, you're now so far behind, it doesn't even matter that you got that other land. So it's just not worth it for you to keep a one land hand. Doesn't matter. Like, the only way the one line hand really works out is if you draw one on 2, when maybe you have 2 or 3 things that cost 2, you skip one, you draw another 1 or 2, and then you're gold, right? But that's such a particular situation, it's just not worth doing. Like, the odds aren't necessarily in your favor. But like, is it an increased odds you would draw land? Yes, but because it's random, you still have percentages of the other percentage thing happening as well. That's the thing I always tell people about randomness, is if we never got mana screwed, the system would not be random. You know what I mean? Just by the definition of the word random, right? We have to have a percentage chance of the bad things happening as much as we do the good things, or the system is not truly random. Same thing when you shuffle your deck, right? In paper. There is a percentage chance that you're going to get a bad draw. The same way that you might draw like the sun and just run hot for the whole tournament, right? Happens, right? But if it wasn't random, those things wouldn't happen. I feel like the matchmaking is weird. I'll make an artifact deck, run into pure artifact removal, run a manager. I don't think that's... I think that's a perception more than actuality. I have yet to see anybody that's recorded anything or whatever where that's actually the case. You hear people say it because, again, we get defensive and we remember those things when our deck doesn't work and it feels like we're running into all the wrong cards. But, again, on the ladder, not talking about open play or whatever, the play queue, that's different. But on the ladder, I have yet to see anybody actually record where that was an actual thing. Where they said, okay, I'm going to play this deck, and you ran into the anti-deck 3 times. And then you played another deck and ran into the anti-deck 3 times. Then you play another deck and run into the anti-deck 3 times. Like, just hasn't happened. Like, not calling anybody a liar. I'm just saying we have yet to see it happen. If I play Scheming Fence as my only creature, targeting Sun Gold Sentinel, but my opponent has Coven active, what the heck is it? Okay. One, I'm assuming Scheming Fence is a card we shouldn't be playing. But that's beside the point. We're asking a question. So let's go into deck building. Scheming Fence. What does that even do? I don't even remember the card. Oh, this guy. Okay. So Skimming Fink says, enter the battlefield. You may choose a non-land permanent of activated abilities of the card. Choose a permanent. Can't be activated. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, first off, that says activated abilities. So if Sun Gold Sentinel doesn't say... Well, Sun Gold Sentinel... Okay, so Coven is an actual trigger, is an activated ability. It's pay something, get something. That's activated. You wouldn't be able to stop the first ability because that's a triggered ability. It just... You get to the point where a thing happens and the card says, when this thing happens, it happens. So if anything is do something, get something, that's activated, period. That's the easiest way to remember it. If it doesn't have that in its ability, it's probably going to be considered as a triggered ability. I do play unranked the majority of the time, so I know the smoothing plays a part. Well, yeah, that's exactly it. So if you're playing unranked, you're playing in the play queue, like, that's a whole different consideration of things, and unfortunately there's no other way to fix that, because you either have some system that tries to balance for that, or you have a bunch of people just getting face smashed all day, right? Because then people that have accounts like mine, where I've played Aaena since the beginning, I would go in there testing a deck, and I just run over every new player I got paired with, right? That's not a good experience for me, because I'm not getting any resistance or testing a deck, which is why I almost just do all my testing on the ladder anyway now, but it'd be bad for the new players, and you just be discouraging people from playing, right? Because they're going like, I just have this new collection. Why am I running in these decks that have all these rares or mythics or whatever? Like, they just wouldn't want to play anymore. So there's really not a perfect world for that. Like, that is a spot where I don't fault the Aaena folks, because I don't even know what a good solution would be for something like that. Jeff Tucker says, I want to mess with the matchmaking in Standard. Mix up your deck and play only one copy of each card. They have that. It's called Brawl. Silky Wookie says, can I then trigger the ability on the Scheming Fence if it resolves, making it hexproof to a color? Scheming Fence is a bad Magic card. Don't play it. But if you're choosing to play it, it says activated abilities on all the turn. Well, it can't be activated. I mean, that's it. Like, I don't understand the question. like I don't understand. It says, like, you can make Scheming Fence a thing, but you would have to have, like, you don't get their ability. Like, you don't get their board state. You get their ability as it's written. So, like, you are copying the ability that says, if you have Coven, then do this. It doesn't give you Coven. Coven always is worded on... Coven always exists on the card. It just says, when you get to this thing, now you get to trigger this. But you would have to have Coven to trigger your Scheming Fence, if that makes sense. So yeah, like, could you trigger it? Yes, but you would have to have Coven. If you don't have Coven, then you can't. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I get your question though, but yeah, you don't automatically get Coven because they have Coven. It doesn't copy game states or anything else. It's just your card now reads the same as their card, effectively. No, there's no conundrum. I mean, it's literally that simple. You copy the words on their card, you don't get their game state. Like, that's actually normal and clean. Like, literally zero confusion. No, that's what I'm saying, 100%. If your opponent has Coven, has nothing to do with you. You have to have it. Like, you do not copy their game state. Like, you 100% have to have it. All right. Trying to think what else we need to cover here. We covered a lot of ground today. I actually feel pretty good about this. Like, I feel like people are going to be better and smarter about building their mana bases, and some of the choices make more sense. Because, you know, that's also one of the tough parts, right? When we're talking about showing new deck lists and stuff, we show a lot of them, and it comes down to, like, hey, this card works with this card, and this is why I'm playing this, or whatever, right? But then, and then it's like, okay, and I'm playing these lands, just so you know what's in here. You know what I mean? Like, we don't really go over why you need all the different lands. Because how many times have been like, oh, well, there's this combo with this card, and this is really cool, and this triggers whenever this makes a token, and, you know, whatever. This sacrifices a thing, so then this deals a damage, and, you know, all this stuff. But then we just go, all right, and we're playing all these lands. Right? So hopefully that clarity helps people, because otherwise, it's just kind of a mess. Most important question about lands, though. What is your favorite land art? I don't have a favorite land art, actually. Uh, I wish I had a good answer for you. I'm sure there's one. It's probably like something obscure. I don't know. I'd probably have to make like maybe one day I'll do like a tier sheet of like the top lands or something. I don't know. I'd have to really think about it. Like, there's a lot of good ones, truthfully. Like, I'm trying to think even land styles maybe that I liked more than others, but I don't know. I'm kind of burnt out even on the full art lands unless they're done very particularly. Like I didn't care for the full arts from the black and white ones we got from Innistrad because they were just the regular lands just in black and white. And I was like, okay, well that's not really that cool. I thought the ones for Theros were kind of neat. They did try to do like a constellation thing with the big mana symbols. But then we kind of ran that back and just did like, oh, here's some stained glass mana symbols and here's this thing, right? So now it's just like, okay, now we just get different versions of the mana symbols. I kind of thought the ones for Kamigawa were cool because they were actually done in a style of like the old like Japanese wood art, you know, whatever, and that was kind of cool. Like not necessarily ones I want to put into a deck, but I at least appreciated that they existed because they were different and neat and thematic. But I don't know. I thought the ones from the last time we did Ravnica were cool, where they had the foil ones that had the guild symbols in the text box or whatever. Those were kind of neat. But like, I don't know, there's a lot of neat ones. I just don't have a particular ones. Tachioba and giving my pain lands lifelink. Too bad they have to be creatures to do so. Yes, but then you would be a net no loss. Because you would deal a damage to yourself to lose one, and then they would trigger the lifelink and you would gain one. So just be a net loss of 0. So I'm not, and plus, like at that stage of the game, because you'd also have to have 7 lands already to trigger Tatiova to begin with, you probably aren't worried about taking damage from your lands because you have some number of non-damage lands already out. So that's neat. I'm trying to like just process how much the value is at that point. Gotta leave to play some kickball. Thanks for your awesome life. Hey, that's awesome. I hope you win your kickball game. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for me, y'all. I think that's got it covered. But yeah, if y'all have any questions, as always, feel free to ask anytime in the Discord. You can come by any of the streams. If you're a member here on YouTube, you can actually send me, there's a request if you want to get deck help. You can send that in as well. That's a thing for our top level members. But yeah, the Discord stays pretty active. Links in the description of every video if you want to come by. We're always answering questions, helping people with decks, all that stuff. It's all about building community and having fun and all that good stuff. I just hope this is the type of video that really helped out a lot of people, because I know it's come up a lot and people have asked about mana. Let me know in the comments if you like these type of live streams. We can try to do these maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks or whatever. Find a strategy thing, cover it, talk about it, and hopefully help you be better at the game of Magic, or at least deck building. But as always, wherever you're watching, whenever you're watching, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Please, pretty please, take care of yourself. Watch out for your family with all the, I don't know, COVID, flu, monkeypox, all the mess out in the world. And most importantly, remember to be awesome and be awesome to each other.